considered by the Republican House. So we want border security, but we want smart border security that serves our nation's needs. Democrats support it, and we stand ready to work on a bipartisan immigration reform legislation, but we're not going to support the administration's hardline agenda, which was slash legal immigration and family reunification, and unfortunately dramatically cut protections for women and children fleeing persecution. Thank you.
Number one, I'm going to introduce you. Number two, I'll administer oath. And number three, you'll have 7 minutes for your opening statement. Is that okay? The Commissioner started in this position March 20th, 2018. He oversees 60,000 employees, manages a budget of $13 billion, ensures the effective operations of Customs Border Patrol efforts to protect national security, promote economic prosperity and security. The Commissioner directs CBP's 3 core missions: counterterrorism, border security, and trade enforcement. He oversees the largest law enforcement agency and the second largest revenue collecting source in the federal government. In 2015, he received a Presidential Rank Award, the nation's highest civil service award. Congratulations. Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give before the committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God? I do. Thank you. Proceed with your statement.
Good morning and thank you. Chairman Grassley, Ranking Member Feinstein, and members of the committee. It's a privilege to appear before you today. U.S. Customs and Border Protection's counterterrorism, border security, trade enforcement, agriculture protection, and trade and travel facilitation missions are essential to U.S. homeland and economic security. With over 60,000 professionals working to protect the American people every day, it is my honor to serve alongside them as Commissioner. Over the past year, we've made strides across almost every area of our mission. We have facilitated record levels of trade and travel, interdicted increasing quantities of hard narcotics, enhanced screening and vetting, implemented the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act, and continued our commitment to ensure our officers and agents are safe as they carry out their critical duties and have the best training, policy, and equipment. The list goes on, and I'm very fortunate to have a tremendous leadership team and a dedicated and innovative workforce at CBP to make progress across all these key areas. Within CBP's broad responsibility, I recognize that our border security mission and our immigration enforcement efforts are of the greatest interest to this committee. Here we have made great strides as well. CBP's ability to detect and interdict illegal border crossings has never been higher. We are putting initial investments in border wall system to good use and have already built critical sections of modern wall in key border areas where it has made an immediate impact. We have turned around our hiring and ended the last fiscal year with almost 500 more frontline officers and agents. We maintain the most capable civilian law enforcement air and marine operations in the world and are accelerating the development and deployment of cutting-edge technology to our workforce. And we've extended our shared zone of security through enhanced international partnerships and capacity building throughout the hemisphere and beyond. That is not to say we do not face challenges in our border security mission. Clearly, the increased smuggling of heroin, fentanyl, and other synthetic opioids, along with growing rates of methamphetamine that are devastating communities across the United States, remains a critical focus. And at the border, we face changing trends in illegal crossings that impact security, exploit our laws, and challenge our resources and personnel. To put this aspect of our mission in context, one day of crossings, last Monday, December 3rd, highlights the trends that we are confronting. On that day, we saw the highest numbers of arrivals at our southwest border in years. 3,029 illegal entries and inadmissible persons arrived at our border last Monday. 85% of them crossed illegally. CBP apprehended or encountered 1,731 members of family groups and 350 unaccompanied children. This means that the illegal crossings and inadmissibles last Monday included over 1,100 children in a single day. This snapshot is emblematic of the steady trends that we've been seeing for many months, increasing crossings overall with a dramatic surge in the percentage of family units and a growing proportion of Central Americans coming to our border. More broadly, for the last 30 days, we've seen over 2,000 unlawful entries between ports and undocumented arrivals at ports of entry each day. Over 1,070 family members are arriving on a consistent basis. To put this in perspective, we will more than double last year's record number of family units at this rate. I've heard a number of commentators observe that even at these levels, the numbers we are seeing are lower than historical peaks, and as a result, they suggest what we are seeing at the border today is not a crisis. I fundamentally disagree with this assessment. From the experience of our agents and officers on the ground, it is indeed both a border security and a humanitarian crisis. What many looking at the total numbers fail to understand is the difference in what is happening now in terms of who is crossing, the risks that they are facing in the journey, and the consequences for our system. First, up until this decade, most of those crossing the border illegally were single adult males. Now the majority crossing are family units and unaccompanied children. This was fewer than 10% up until the year 2012. 59% of crossings last month were families and unaccompanied children. Second, migration from Mexico remains at historically low levels, while the majority of illegal border crossings now come from 3 countries of Central America: Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Central America has now exceeded Mexican migration 4 out of the last 5 years and reached 70% of crossings last month. November was the first month in recorded history where more people arrived from another country than Mexico, with Guatemala exceeding Mexico by 3,000. The third major trend is a dramatic increase in claims of fear of return, or asylum claims. Between 2000 and 2013, fewer than 1% of those encountered at our border claimed asylum. Last year at ports of entry, the number of asylum claims more than doubled to 38,269. Nearly 31% of those deemed inadmissible at ports of entry claimed asylum. These increases in demographic changes in crossings are direct responses to the vulnerabilities in our legal framework that have become well known to smugglers and migrants. These weaknesses in our laws now represent the most significant factors impacting border security, and they include the asylum gap, where approximately 80% of individuals meet the initial credible fear bar in the asylum process, while only 10 to 20% are found to have valid asylum claims at the end of their immigration court proceedings. The disparate treatment under the Trafficking Victims Protection and Reauthorization Act, still a critical statute, but it allows for children arriving from Mexico and Canada to be repatriated, but not from other countries, including those in Central America. And the inability to keep families together while they complete expeditious and fair immigration proceedings. Instead, crossing with a child is a near guarantee of a speedy release. These deficiencies ensure a high likelihood of success, and the trends they invite have significant ramifications. First, our infrastructure is incompatible with this reality. Our Border Patrol stations and ports of entry were built to handle mostly male single adults in custody, not families or children. Second, the illegal crossings have a much different character, with families and children coming across in large groups and simply presenting themselves to Border Patrol agents. The smugglers are choosing the timing and location for these crossings strategically in order to disrupt our border security efforts, create a diversion for smuggling of narcotics, and allow single adults seeking to evade capture to sneak in. Even worse, these smugglers visit horrible violence, sexual assault, and extortion on some of the most vulnerable people in our hemisphere. And lastly, these trends mean that regardless of whether an individual who has entered illegally has a valid case for protection or asylum, they are increasingly unlikely to be repatriated. Indeed, only 1.5% of family units from Central America apprehended over a full fiscal year ago in 17 have been removed to their countries of origin, despite the fact that most will not end up having valid claims to remain in the U.S. when their court proceedings conclude. That perception that our system will allow them to stay in the U.S. indefinitely is clearly the driving pull factor for those making the journey to our border, along with important push factors, which include challenging conditions in many parts of Central America. This incentivizes them to put their lives in the hands of smugglers and make the dangerous trek north to the southwest border. The cost of these pull and push factors is seen every day in profits derived by TCOs and lives lost on the journey, and in the loss of youth and energy from the countries of the Northern Triangle. This is clearly both a border security and a humanitarian crisis. There are solutions to this crisis, and many of them have broad support. We need to continue to support the governments of Central America to improve economic opportunities, to address poverty and hunger, and to improve governance and security. We must work with the new administration in Mexico on addressing transnational criminal organizations that prey on migrants, and we must invest in border security, including a modern border wall system, additional technology at ports of entry, additional agents and officers, and air and marine support. All of these steps will make a difference. But we must also confront and address the vulnerabilities in our legal framework for lasting change at the border. As we engage in discussion of CBP's border security and immigration missions today, I urge the committee to consider the acute need for legislative action with this backdrop. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to the committee's questions.
5-minute round questions, and there's a vote at 11. It's my intention to keep the meeting going so people can take their turn. I'll probably be gone 7 or 8 minutes, and just keep the meeting going according to the either seniority or arrival, however it's done. My first question, on November 25, 1,000 migrants in a caravan ignored and overwhelmed Mexican law enforcement and attempted to breach our border at Port of Entry, San Diego. Agitators in the group rushed the port, hurling rocks, bottles, debris, and other projectiles at your officers guarding a fence. In response, the agents deployed non-lethal tear gas to control the agitators and close the port of entry. As you know, Commissioner, this incident has been criticized and even mischaracterized by the media and others, but the use of tear gas is unprecedented. I have these statistics. CBP employed tear gas a total of 126 times since 2012. That includes 79 times between 2012 and 2016 under President Obama. Nobody wants to see children and women hurt. Nobody wants to see migrants, travelers, or even our agents hurt. That's why I'm happy to hear that your agency's use of firearm decreased 69% since 2012 to a record low this year. Unfortunately, assaults against your personnel has increased 45% to 847 times in fiscal year 2017. So I want you to give you an opportunity to explain to the committee and the American people what happened on November 25th. So 4 parts that I'm going to read all at once so you don't have to answer short questions. Who initiated the conflict? Did your agency intentionally target women and children? What were the agent's options? And did this incident deviate from standard protocol? And is there an investigation?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that question. November 25th, we faced a dynamic and challenging situation in Tijuana, no question. We had over 1,000 migrants who were marching toward the Mexican side of the port of entry, El Chaparral, and pushed through the Mexican federal police lines there, and then started a chaotic attempt to enter the U.S. Through both the port of entry on the Mexican side and then ultimately through different areas of weak points along the fence line in San Diego sector. This was a 2.5-mile stretch of border that large groups attempted to penetrate at multiple points over the course of about a 4 or 5 hour stretch. Importantly, due to the help of the Department of Defense, who put barriers in place in the southbound lanes very quickly after we saw this group forming and push past Mexican federal police, we're able to shut down access through the southbound lanes in the United States. So they were deterred and turned around. Unfortunately, they then sought weak points along the fence line. And throughout the next 5 hours, we saw large groups entering the United States through weak points in the legacy fence. It's actually being replaced right now, thanks to the investments in fiscal year 17. We've already built 33 out of those 40 miles. We're putting the rest in place now. They were assaultive in their behavior. They threw rocks at agents. We had an agent who now has to have surgery for a dislocated patella who was hit by a rock during this event. And the agents were in challenging spaces. First, the Tijuana River Channel, where you've seen a lot of photography and video of over 500 migrants who were seeking to enter en masse through that area. And then in the border zone, where we have a primary fence and then a secondary fence, where there's very little room to maneuver or back up. So our agents were in a difficult situation. To answer your specific questions, who initiated this contact, it was initiated by some of the agitators and lead organizers of this group. Whether women and children were intentionally targeted with less lethal gas and pepper spray, absolutely not. The agitators who were throwing rocks were the ones targeted. Whether this was within protocols, yes, in fact, in our use of force continuum, pepper spray and CS gas are authorized to address assaultive behavior or even active resistance, which was certainly occurring in this case. And is there an investigation review? Yes, we have for all incidents of use of force. We have a use of force review board. This is being pursued under the auspices of San Diego Sector, requested by Chief Rodney Scott, who oversees the agents involved, with support of our National Office of Professional Responsibility and our Law Enforcement Safety and Compliance Division. I think it's remarkable, Senator, that our agents were able to resolve the situation without a serious injury to any of the migrants, without a serious breach of the border by a large group. And I think it was done very professionally, and we're going to take any lessons learned from this review and apply them in the future.
Senator Feinstein.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. While we're on the subject of tear gas being used, has CBP ever fired tear gas at young children on the border prior to November 25th?
Just to clarify, Senator, we did not fire tear gas at young children on November 25th. But yes, CS gas has been used to address large groups seeking to enter unlawfully, actually in San Diego Sector in the same exact area, almost 5 years to the day, a large group that did include women and children in it as well.
Well, CBP's use of force manual, as I understand it, does not specifically authorize tear gassing young children. Do you think CBP needs to make any changes to its use of force policies to make sure that children are not harmed going forward?
So, first of all, no, of course, our policy does not authorize tear gassing young children, nor did that happen, just to say that again in this case.
Well, I can show you a picture that was on CNN.
No, I understand. There's lots of... The full description of this situation will come out in the review, and we'll be transparent about the findings from that. Our use of force policy has been rigorously reviewed. It was built on recommendations from the Police Executive Research Forum, and it's resulted, as the chairman noted, in significant improvements across the board. I would offer that I don't think any law enforcement agency in the U.S. has made more progress in the training and the tactics used by our officers and agents than CBP. In 2012, we had 55 uses of force with a firearm. In 2018, we had 15, despite increasing numbers of apprehensions and assaults. So we're making tremendous progress in this area.
Who authorizes the use of tear gas in your agency?
So law enforcement use of force is driven by the circumstances that an officer or agent encounters in the field during their mission. They're looking at a totality of the circumstances,
yes,
the threat presented.
What position is charged with giving the direction to use it?
So the direction to use it is not given from a top-down chain of command perspective. The use of less lethal devices is authorized. We then have agents trained and certified. They're allowed to carry those devices, but the individual agent on the scene makes the decision on whether to deploy a less lethal device to address the situation.
So what you're saying is on the 25th, one agent made the decision to use tear gas. How many agents used tear gas?
That's all being reviewed in the overall review, and more than one agent made that decision based on the risk and threat they were presented with in, again, multiple different engagements across about 2.5 miles of border.
Well, the picture that I have that ran on CNN shows a mother pulling a child, the second child on her other arm with a diaper, and tear gas rolling in behind them. And I think that's not a picture or an act that befits this country.
I respect that view, Senator. It's very unfortunate that women and children were in the vicinity of this large group that was trying to enter the United States. I don't know that that picture accurately tells the full story of the scope of events on that Sunday.
I'm sure it does not, but nonetheless, that's what was photographed. And I think that's the realization of the use. And you yourself pointed out the large number of children and increase in numbers over the years. And that's one of our great concerns. But I want to go on, and I want to ask you about the separation of children from their parents. I know Border Patrol doesn't have a lot to do with it, but how many children have been separated from their parents at the border since June 20th?
So by the U.S. Border Patrol, approximately 81. So less than one a day.
Have any children been separated solely because their parents entered the United States without a visa?
No.
Are you aware of any discussions or efforts to develop a new family separation policy?
No, I'm not. And just to clarify, these separations are done consistent with the guidance in the executive order of June 20th, consistent with the court order in the Miss L case. They are for child welfare. We're talking about examples of a parent wanted for murder, a parent who's had a stroke and needs to be taken to the emergency room. Those are the kind of situations where children are being separated at the border. It's for child welfare or a parent who's unable to take care of the child.
Well, those aren't the only situations where they've been separated.
Since June 20th.
As I mentioned to you, my understanding is they're building 4 separate places to house children in California alone now. So something's going on that says that children are being taken from their parents.
We're unable to confirm that, Senator. I did have our congressional affairs team reach out to HHS to make sure they connected with your staff, but we're not aware of any additional child centers being built in California.
I'll get that information. I'd like to go and see them myself. What is Border Patrol's standard for determining whether separation is in the best interest of the child?
We go through the criteria laid out in both the executive order and the Miss L court order. So we're looking for a serious criminal offense that needs to be pursued or prosecuted, a child welfare concern, potentially a history of sexual abuse by the adult that's involved in the family unit, again, a communicable disease or other medical condition that prevents the parent from being able to care for the child.
Senator Cornyn.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner, from where I sit, it looks to me like the transnational criminal organizations, sometimes we refer to them as drug cartels, but they do a whole lot more illegal activity. It looks to me like they're winning.
I think they're making a tremendous profit off the backs of very, very vulnerable people right now. $2.5 billion for human smuggling.
I've read that the average cost for transporting a Central American to the United States and trying to place them in the United States is roughly $8,000. Is that within the ballpark?
That is. We're looking at 5 to 10,000, 7 to 8 on average, and increasing every year.
So it's quite a profitable business for them, correct?
Absolutely.
And Congress could fix the problem of family units and unaccompanied minors by simply treating countries from non-contiguous countries the same way we treat immigration from, let's say, Mexico, correct?
Yeah, there are several legislative changes that can make a big impact in this flow.
One of those is the Humane Act that Representative Henry Cuellar and I have introduced in a number of different times, but we can't seem to get much interest in actually a legislative solution. And in the meantime, the cartels continue to win. You heard me mention the fact that last year the CDC said about 70,000 Americans died of drug overdoses. I think about 50,000 of those are from opioids, either fentanyl, synthetic, or heroin, or prescription drugs that are being abused. Would you agree with my estimate that about 90% of the heroin that makes its way into the United States comes from Mexico across the southwestern border?
Yes, it's more than 90%.
And you pointed out that this gap that's being exploited by these criminal organizations in terms of transporting family units and unaccompanied children are used as a strategic diversion by the cartels, because when Border Patrol and our other government officials are tied up basically trying to process large numbers of people at the border, it leaves a opening or gap in our defenses that are exploited by the drug cartels. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And for those of us who come from border states, but I would argue for all Americans who benefit from legitimate trade and commerce across our border, when these caravans or when large numbers of people show up at the border and block the ports of entry, that essentially prevents that legitimate trade and commerce from occurring, does it not? I believe that happened at the San Isidro Bridge in Tijuana, between Tijuana and San Diego.
It does. During this incident on November 25th, we had to shut the port for about 5 hours to prevent a large rush. And that was very costly. It was, Sunday of the Black Friday weekend. There was a shopping mall right there in San Isidro that put out a press release that they lost $5.5 million of business during that 5 hours alone.
And you call this a pull factor. In other words, when the cartels are successful in placing people into the United States, taking advantage of these gaps in our laws, this is something that actually encourages further illegal immigration into the United States, does it not?
Yes. I mean, if you're very likely to be allowed to stay in the U.S. indefinitely, that's a huge incentive to try to come unlawfully.
And you pointed out that the gap that they've also figured out is to make an asylum claim, and that used to not be common, but now it is common. Is it your belief that these migrants who come into the United States are coached to say the magic words to basically invoke our laws governing asylum?
Yeah, I think the dramatic increase is explained by both smugglers and migrants' awareness that it's a good way to be allowed to stay in the United States.
Recently, we've read that the administration, I think Secretary Nielsen and perhaps others, maybe Secretary Pompeo, have been negotiating with the incoming administration of President Lopez Obrador toward an agreement that would allow these asylum seekers to stay in Mexico while their claims are being processed in the United States. Can you tell us what the status of that is?
So I wouldn't want to get ahead of any diplomatic discussions at the cabinet level, Senator, but I can tell you we've had very good dialogue with the incoming team of President Lopez Obrador, very committed to working together on the shared migration problem in the region, and very optimistic about partnering with them.
Well, I understand your reluctance of getting ahead of an announcement, an official announcement, but it strikes me that if such an agreement is struck, that represents a historic moment in our relationship with Mexico as regards the migration challenges and the fact that they would actually offer asylum to some of the Central Americans in Mexico, the fact that they would offer work permits to them and agree to allow them to stay there while their asylum claims are being processed in the United States is quite a coup. And so I would congratulate those in the administration that are responsible. That's a big step. Thank you.
Let me give a heads up. On the Republican side, Flake and Lee would be the next two, and on the Democrat side, it's Leahy now and then Durbin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was listening to this, and I was recently at the Hidalgo port of entry. I saw the practice of metering. CBP limits the number of asylum claims they'll process because of space and resource. Now, at this major port, about 12 million people pass through there each year, 12 million. And your agency recently said they'd process only 50. DHS Inspector General report from September, a very recent one, found evidence that strongly suggests that metering at ports of entry increases illegal crossings between ports. Do you agree with your Inspector General that metering pushes asylum seekers to attempt to enter the country illegally?
So